A 92-year-old Christchurch inventor claims to have come up with a novel way to make a cup of tea. He's invented a contraption that he claims uses the power of sound to boil water. Beverly Lockhart went to investigate.
It looks like a desk lamp, is cool to the touch and appears to be doing nothing until it comes into contact with water. 92-year-old former Spitfire pilot Peter Davey claims his invention uses the power of sound to boil water.
DSIR, they're a bit baffled how it works. Nobody really knows how it works.
Davey believes high-frequency sonic vibrations emitted from within the silver bulb cause the water to boil. He says the idea came to him 50 years ago when he noticed different saxophone notes caused different household items to rattle. The mains-powered gizmo has experts intrigued.
Never seen anything like it in my life, as they say.
Professor Williamson has his doubts about Davey's acoustic theory and suspects there are two simple electrodes inside the boiler.
It's the conductivity of the water that provides the path for the current and provides the resistance to give the heating.
I'm careful that I don't divulge everything. I'm waiting to get a manufacturer that's prepared to put some money into it.
And if he does get it on the shelves, he's already got one interested customer.
If I saw one in a shop, I'd buy one, because I think they're an interesting little bit of technology. However it is they work.
But for now, Davey is savouring his gizmo's success and sticking to his own unique theory on how it works. Beverly Lockhart, 3 News.
Hello guys, it's 1 in the morning and I decided to make a video and show you how to boil 1.5 liters of water in a really short time and with a very small amount of power input. As you can see in here, I have a bridge rectifier which is going to be connected to the wall, and then the DC voltage is going to go on those two plates. Those plates are separated from each other by spacers like this. These are 3 millimeters thick. I have 4 of those in there. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna show you that I'm putting exactly 1.5 liters of water in here. This is 700 milliliters. I don't know if you can see, but I hope you can see it. Yeah. So we go twice. I'm gonna fill it up more than 700, so yep. The first one, and here is second one. Yippee! So we have about 1.5 liters of water in there right now. Now we're gonna check the temperature of the plate and water. So the plate is at 11.6 degrees Celsius. Water is at 10 degrees. So 10, 11. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna connect this dude to the wall and I'm gonna show you if everything doesn't blow up. I'm gonna show you how does this thing work. So let's just hope it doesn't pop. 1, 2. It's fine. So as you can see, we are making some hydrogen and oxygen in there, which compared to the amount of heat we are generating, that is nothing. Actually, as you can see, the water is already boiling. It's not just the hydrogen oxygen anymore. The water is already boiling and the fumes are rising. And I think I'm gonna disconnect this very soon. But I'll let it go up a little bit. Let's see what happens. The water is boiling, as you can see. You see the steam? Yeah, baby, that is boiling. 5, 4, 6, 3, 2, 1, bomba! Now we're gonna check the temperature of the plate. At 60 degrees. And water, 62. The time, check it in the video. Now I'm gonna continue boiling this one. It's after all 1 in the night. Who cares what if things can go wrong? There we go. It starts the boiling immediately. And the steam is rising. Plates are heating up. I have to stop it because I don't want the zip ties to melt and pop up my fuse. So yeah, you can see it's steaming, no? Yeah, it is steaming very nicely. Now we're gonna check the temperature one more time. Plate at 50, 60. What? Plates are at 40 degrees. Water at 66. So, yep, that's how it happens. There are people who talk about this, they say that this is because of the sound vibrations and all that kind of lies. Those are just lying, they're just trying to hide this technology from you. And I don't think even you need to rectify this. I have seen people doing this just with the AC voltage. The current which goes through this, I can't say, I don't have the amp meter at the moment, which can tell us how much is the output. But as you saw, it can generate steam in a very short time. I hope you enjoyed my 1 o'clock in the morning video. Please tell me what you think. Thank you. Bye.
How do I think the pyramids were built? To be honest, I have no answer to that question. And anybody who tells you that he or she knows how the pyramids were built are not telling the truth, because we don't know. We don't know. The Great Pyramid contains a number of mysteries. The Great Pyramid, first of all, is very big. The Great Pyramid weighs 6 million tons. We can calculate that from its mass. It weighs 6 million tons. Its footprint is 13 acres. It's more than 750 feet along each side. It's 481 feet tall. More than 2.5 million individual blocks of stone were used in its construction. But it's not just big, it's really, really precise. The Great Pyramid is locked in to the cardinal dimensions of our planet. The Great Pyramid is targeted on true north, within 3/60ths of a single degree. Now, no modern builder would create a large building and add onto his or her shoulders the additional burden of aligning it to true north within a fraction of a single degree. They just wouldn't get it. They wouldn't understand why it was important to do that. But something drove the builders of the Great Pyramid to go to a very great additional trouble, not only to create this massive, imposing monument, but also to lock it on to true north. And then other things, to incorporate into its dimensions the dimensions of our planet. I don't want to get too numerical or possibly even boring here, but if you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. And if you measure the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid accurately and multiply that measurement by 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. In other words, for thousands of years, through times, through dark ages, when human beings didn't even know they lived on a planet, never mind its dimensions, that monument has encoded and speaks out the dimensions of our planet on a scale of 1 to 43,200. And the scale is not random. The number 43,200 is derived from a key motion of the Earth, which is called the precession of the Earth's axis. The Earth wobbles on its axis very slowly, at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. And 43,200 is a multiple of 72. In fact, I think it's 600 times 72, but I need to double check that. But it's a multiple of 72, check it out. So they've given us the dimensions of our planet on a scale defined by the planet itself. And that's an incredibly clever thing to do. How on earth did they do it? Where did that knowledge come from? This is why I'm forced to consider the possibility of a lost civilization in the human story. This is a work of almost, but not quite, space-age precision. It contains errors, but they are human errors for sure, but they're very tiny. great precision, great skill, great craft. Some people will say to you, oh, the Great Pyramid was built by slaves. That is utter bullshit. No slaves were ever involved in the construction of the Great Pyramid. As far as I know, there were no slaves in Old Kingdom Egypt whatsoever. The Great Pyramid, I've climbed it 5 times. I've been in every known chamber in the Great Pyramid. It is a work of stunning artistic achievement. You're looking at the work of masters of architecture at the peak of their skill. Not an unwilling labor force, but people who gave their labor to that work with love and with care and with attention. There are blocks of stone weighing 70 tons that have been raised more than 300 feet above the ground. And we're not talking a couple of blocks, we're talking dozens of blocks of that weight. The average block weighs about 2.5 tons. It's the moving of those huge blocks of stone, their arrangement into a high precision monument, and the achievement of actually doing it, because you know if you make a small mistake at the base, by the time you get to the summit of your 481 foot high pyramid, you don't have a pyramid, you have a corkscrew. You know? They got it all right, and nobody today can explain how they did it with the knowledge that is supposed to have been available in ancient Egypt in the Old Kingdom, and with the tools that are supposed to have been available. And that's why I can't help feeling that we are missing some chapter from the human story.
What's up, guys? Paranormal Perception here. If you're new to this channel, swing by for the first time, please subscribe. And to all the new subscribers over the past few days and the past few weeks, I really appreciate it. But found this article off ancientcode.com. Secret chambers beneath the Sphinx. Rare images show how to access the Sphinx. There have been theories and speculation for years about secret chambers all around the Sphinx, and one of the main ones is the top of the head. There have been many researchers and authors that have researched the Sphinx over the years, and even after all of these centuries, it's crazy how it continues to be new evidence, new theories, just new things that keeps coming out about the Sphinx and other mysteries in the ancient world as well, including the pyramids. But in 1987, a Japanese team from Waseda University carried out an electromagnetic sounding survey of the Khufu pyramid and the Sphinx and found several cavities and tunnels. And here's some of the rare images of the Sphinx suggest that there are several intricate entrances. And the article goes on to say, the Great Sphinx of Giza has captured the imagination and interest of anyone who has seen it. This fascinating monument, which proudly guards the pyramids at Giza, is without a doubt one of the most mysterious ancient structures on the planet. If we take a look at the Sphinx today and compare it to extremely old and rare images of the monument when it was still covered in sand, we will notice numerous interesting details which point to the possibility of an underground world existing beneath it. This ancient monument, which some authors argue is far older than the ancient Egyptian civilization, was discovered almost completely covered in sand in 1817 AD, when the first modern archaeological dig, led by Giovanni Battista, managed to uncover the Sphinx chest completely. And this image that you're looking at right now was taken in 1925. And this man, he is entering from the top of the Sphinx. But the thing is, you can't see the Sphinx because it's covered in sand. And one thing that's crazy is that if the Sphinx was covered in sand and excavated, it makes you wonder what else is out there that's buried maybe a little further deep under the sand and that has yet to be discovered. It's one crazy and just awesome world that we live in. But it took a little while to excavate the entire Sphinx. It was between 1925 and 1936. And the images that you are looking at now are the conclusion of some work by some Japanese that contain these cavities within the Sphinx and underneath the Sphinx. And there have been many theories of these cavities within the Sphinx and how to actually get into the Sphinx. But the Japanese, they seem like they're onto something here, though. And John Anthony West also carried out a survey of the Sphinx using seismic refraction. It was back in the early 90s, I believe. And I really suggest you just Google or YouTube search John Anthony West, Egypt or the pyramids and the Sphinx, and you will find some really great information about his awesome research. And I'm going to give the link to this article in the description, and give me some of your thoughts and even your crazy theories about this in the comments below. And just tell me whatever you think about the Sphinx, about these cavities, about just this article, and just be creative. I'm just curious to see some of these comments, but just let me know your thoughts, and until next time, keep truthing and have a good one.
Now, why are they, this is a really confusing thing to me, why do they continue to rebuild that thing? Because when they're rebuilding it, they're rebuilding the feet and the paws of the Sphinx, and I understand there's considerable erosion that they have to mitigate, but it's not the Sphinx anymore. I mean,
well, it's bringing the Sphinx back to supposedly what it was originally. The problem is an engineering problem. They don't know themselves, and at least a few of them acknowledge it. Schock thinks this, and I mean, he's not in charge of doing the repairs, that it may be doing more damage because it's still weathering on the inside, and by covering it over with these usually very badly done stuff, that they're actually doing more damage than that. Well, the Department of Antiquities.
Is this Zawi?
He's no longer
is he in the pokey? Did they lock him up?
No.
I know he was in trouble
they've
for a
never
while,
been
right?
able. He was in trouble, but they couldn't pin it on him.
Oh, the slippery
and they would
bastard.
have if they could. No, listen, Zahi, on a personal level, that's another long story, and we've already gone on for 2 hours. But on a personal level, I can get on with Zahi, and then he's now back in, not formally in a position of power. He's not head of the department. And he's got his problems.
Did you see the debate that he had with Graham Hancock?
Oh, God.
Walked out.
He was a
right
disaster.
away.
Yeah, he was a disaster. And all of his friends even, I mean, the guy who runs my trip, Mohammed Nazmi, I called a surgeon because he really knows how to operate. He's a wonderful guy. And he's a good personal friend of Zahi's. And he said, Zahi, this is a disaster. But he lived through it. And he's back on the scene, as it were. Anyway.
So we're looking at the Sphinx enclosure here, and this massive structure with all this erosion around it.
Right, all this erosion to it, and then
people see this on YouTube.
Yeah, when you'll see as we go through a few slides, you get a few slides, you'll see the sense of that erosion. This is just a wonderful picture of it taken by a good friend of mine. Keep going. This
Have
is
they
why,
thought about
this is why the Sphinx could not have been weathered by sand.
What we're looking at right now, for the people that are just listening, is it buried in sand, which it has been many times. When Napoleon found it was buried in sand, correct?
Right, completely buried in sand, and probably for a few thousand years. This is photograph taken about 2000, when it had already been excavated and filled up with sand again, which happens pretty quickly. So basically you can say, give or take a few hundred years, that since its supposed construction around 2500 BC, it's been buried in sand about 3,000 of those 4,500 years.
That's insane.
So that's the proof. Yeah, there's the evidence. And still the geologists go on ranting about sand. When you're talking about this friend of yours who's going through the trees, say, okay, how did it weather by sand?
Wind and sand, right? How did it get exposed?
The wind can't affect it that
well,
way.
Wasn't that the original text of who do they attribute to the construction of the pyramid? Tutmosis?
No. Pharaoh Khafra.
Khafra.
The successor of Khufu, who supposedly built the Great Pyramid, which is not true in its entirety. The pyramids, this is another complex argument, which, as you see, everything's complex. They're almost certainly built in stages, and the earliest stages probably date from whenever the Sphinx was originally built.
And the argument for Khafra building it wasn't a text that said that he had a dream that if he uncovered the Sphinx, that he would become pharaoh.
No, that's Tutmosis.
That's
the fourth,
Tutmosis. Okay.
1,000 years later, they attribute it to Khafra because the causeway that leads from the Sphinx, if you go behind it, you see the beginning? Not really, you see just the back of the Sphinx. The causeway leads up right to the middle of the pyramid, of the Khafra pyramid, which he almost certainly did build, or anyway superimposed upon something that was there before, because you can prove that. Okay, keep going.
Did they used to think it was Tutmosis?
No. They always thought it was Khafra because. Again.
What is this right here? That's not the Rosetta Stone, is it?
No. That's the stela of Tutmosis that talks about how in a dream it's covered with sand.
Oh, that's it right there.
That's in 1450 BC.
So that means evidence, in 1450 BC it was covered
in sand. Exactly. And with a certain number of other evidences of that sort, you can put together the timeline that tells you.
I swear I've read online someone attributing Tutmosis to the creation of it, but there's a lot of erroneous.
A lot of junk on it.
Now, the face of the Sphinx, this is a really controversial thing, right? Because the face of the Sphinx is clearly newer than the body. It's less eroded, and it's also a very African-looking face. do they think that, which obviously it's the continent Africa, but do they think there's the Nubians had conquered Egypt at one point in time, right? And wasn't the speculation that one of the Nubian pharaohs had created this?
Yeah, well, some said that. 19th century travelers, lots of them noted that this was really an African face, but what they meant is that it's a sub-Sahara African face. It's a real African face. The Nubians are very black, but have more or less finer features. They don't have the jaw like that. I mean, that looks more like an NBA basketball player than an Egyptian.
Right.
Anyway, the headdress is all redone. The picture before, where it was covered with sand,
right?
You see how weathered the headdress was.
They redid the bottom
of it.
They redid
the headdress in its entirety. The face itself is a much harder outcrop of limestone, so it hasn't weathered to the same extent that the body of the Sphinx has weathered.
So you think it's of the same era?
We don't know. Actually, because you see the African face is a real problem, actually. Of course, the Egyptians are as prejudiced as everyone else, and they don't want to actually believe that the Sphinx itself could be a sub-Saharan African, maybe from an earlier period when the Africans were pharaohs. We don't know.
John Hutchinson is a self-taught theoretical physicist who has discovered the key to the Bermuda Triangle phenomenon, among other things. He has been a speaker on Discovery Channel documentaries, not that that means anything, because they produce propaganda as well. John Hutchinson collects old surplus Navy equipment. He hooks it up and does his own experiments with it, and he's compiled quite an impressive collection. While experimenting with Tesla coils tuned to ultra-high frequencies and pointing them at different objects, he was able to make them fly straight off the ground and pull metal apart like rubber spaghetti by fine-tuning the frequencies. All of the effects that John has discovered have already been known to our military since the 1930s, and I will point out one experiment in particular that was leaked accidentally. The Philadelphia experiment. There were many experiments like it done by the military, and all of them still classified as of the date of this video. During this one experiment, they placed 3 large Tesla coils on a destroyer, one on the bow, one on the stern, and one on the mast of the ship. they ran a large battery of tests experimenting with different frequency ranges and recording their results. They found that in certain frequencies the boat would lose weight. It would seem to rise up out of the water. So they did a test and tried it with men aboard. When they stopped to check the status of the crew, many of the men were motion sick and vomiting and had bloodshot eyes and bleeding. And on the lower decks they found dead crew members. Some of them had their bodies melted inside the wall, literally fused inside the metal hull of the ship. Many were hemorrhaging from organs and had bloodshot eyes from ruptured blood vessels, and also had bruising on their bodies from internal bleeding due to ruptured blood vessels. Some people, including whoever censors Wikipedia, will try to argue that the Philadelphia experiments, as I am talking about, didn't happen. They refer to a different Philadelphia experiment, obviously a different one than the real one that we all know about. I've also seen many attempts to discredit John Hutchinson and his experiments, and I want to point out that John's experiments cannot be discredited, while his own interpretations of the phenomenon can, because he misunderstands a lot of things. Basically, this so-called Hutchinson effect and the Philadelphia experiment were experiments which discovered something called hyperatomic resonance, which causes diamagnetism. Quantum mechanics tells us that everything in the universe is a wave, and thus has its own frequency. Well, let's think about the table that your computer monitor sits on for 1 second. Is that a wave? Well, actually, it is. The table, the board that has a frequency, usually a couple different frequencies. The more complex the geometry of the object, the more frequencies needed to describe the object. We'll start with a simple object, like a long flat board, and we'll compare it with a really, really long flat board. The man holding the longer flat board will shake his much slower than the man with the shorter one. This is because the object's frequency along a particular axis, say the one to the length, going along the length of the board, is inversely proportional to the length of the board itself. So the longer the board, the lower the frequency. The shorter the board, which it can effectively be thought of as a wavelength itself, the higher the frequency. Small objects require a much higher frequency than you could shake it at, so you could use a motor or a guitar string to vibrate them. I suggest you study everything you can on waves. I can't go over everything in this video because I'm going to have to show how they describe all these different effects. So I want you to read up on waves so you can understand how the wavelength is related to the frequency, and most importantly, so you will understand resonance and bass frequency, not BASS, B-A-S-E, bass frequency, and harmonics. Harmonics, like first, second, third, they go all the way up in music anyway until it gets too high for you to hear. Harmonics explains why a guitar's 12th fret is always at the exact halfway point between the bridge and the neck. You divide a wave in half and go up an octave, and multiply by 2 to go down an octave. Waves and resonance can be effectively and incredibly powerful. Take, for example, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, or Tesla's earthquake machine. At one point in his career, when Tesla was poor like me, he lived in an apartment in a tall building, and he put together an 8-watt motor which vibrated a 15-pound weight back and forth at a tunable frequency. He measured the height of the building and calculated the approximate frequency of the building itself, and played around with the motor until he tuned into that frequency. The entire building began to rock back and forth with the rhythm of the 15-pound weight due to he produced a standing wave. This is the same thing that brought down the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. You can read up more on this if you want. Basically, the owner of the building called the fire department and directed them to the strange man's room, where they found Tesla with his machine on the floor, which they promptly smashed to pieces in a panicked effort to stop the building from collapsing. They didn't know that inversing the machine would dampen the standing wave faster than actually smashing it, but luckily the building was a steel-framed building, heavily redundant structure, and did not collapse. Tesla's so-called earthquake machine was simply harmonizing with the wavelength of the entire building, producing a standing wave. In the strongman competitions, there are men who can pull trains weighing 100 tons or more. Since force equals mass times acceleration, and the masses of a locomotive is huge, the acceleration will be small, but acceleration is a change in velocity, so although it's small, it still changes the velocity of the train, beginning to speed it up and increase its velocity by little tiny bits. So after a while, you can actually get the train moving by pulling it like a lot. And that type of motion is linear motion, but you can apply the same exact thing to a heavy, tall building, which you put wave motion into. And this is this type of resonance. The type of resonance which causes the Hutchinson effect and related effects can be explained by looking at how the frequencies compare to the molecular and atomic structure of the material itself. This phenomenon is only observed while using ultra-high frequency and incredibly high frequency Tesla waves. Why? Because they correspond to the frequency of the distance in the atoms in the structure. The distance between the atoms in a structure is equal to the wavelength, which will resonate that structure. Once you find the resonant frequency with the Tesla waves, you have effectively trapped and aligned the atoms. You can now tune the frequency a tiny bit higher, causing diamagnetism by squeezing the atoms together, restricting the electron orbits, which causes a north pole and a south pole, artificially induced diamagnetism, which causes levitation. If you lower the frequency, it pulls the atoms apart a tiny bit, which causes a phase change of matter, where a solid starts behaving like a liquid due to these strong electromagnetic forces resonating within it. This is the force that pulls aluminum bars apart and turns them into rubber spaghetti. This is the force that levitates 70-pound cannonballs. It's electromagnetic force, not a new force, nothing new. It would be scientifically possible to create a craft that could float around using this type of artificially induced diamagnetism, only it would need to be extremely lightweight and of perfect crystalline structure. Nano-engineered quasi-crystals would do the trick. However, it cannot be used as a propulsion technology unless you can show how it doesn't violate conservation of momentum. So ion wind would probably be the best bet here, and I'm almost positive that this is the technology used in the rod-shaped UFOs, and I also don't see why it wouldn't be used in the sport models to give it a little extra oomph in addition to the superfluid centrifuge accelerator ring. So, there you have it. I hope I explained a lot of these phenomenon for people.
I have a contact in Russia named Elaine, and in roughly 1999, he sent me a URL about this Russian scientist and a flying platform. And I went and looked at it. This is the cover off of the book, which I managed to get from Russia, so all in Russian. Grebennikov discovered something called a cavity structural effect, and it's basically what we're talking about with tubes. And the frequencies that cancel themselves. Oh, by the way, Grebennikov says there are the two most common materials in this world are cellulose, because it doesn't decay, and chitin. Chitin is spelled C-H-I-T-I-N. That's what all insects are made out of. Chitin. It's the shells, the body, beetles, roaches, butterflies, everything's made out of chitin, and it doesn't dissolve and it doesn't die. So all the dust in your house, that's billion-year-old bugs that are still grumbled and falling. But what's interesting about chitin is dielectric. The Casimir plates are dielectric. They repel electricity. These nanostructure arrays, when you look at them under a microscope, this is what they look like. This is excreted by the bug in growing its tissues, you know, the chitin. That's what it looks like as you go significantly greater magnifications. That's what you see, finer and finer. Look like it's machined. It's almost perfect. Go to the next one, please. This is even a finer magnification, and these are those little resonating cavities that appear to pick up the lower you go, the higher frequencies, like a straw with a certain frequency, like organ pipes. As the organ pipes change in length, the frequency goes up. So the deeper you go into mass with these resonating structures, eventually you're going to hit Cater's frequency below infrared terahertz, and you would be able to cancel gravity. So that's what all this is leading to. The original experiment, he's looking at a microscope. This one particular bug, he won't tell us if it's a beetle. A beetle or a butterfly or some kind of a wasp. He won't tell the genus of the insect. But he claims he was looking at one little piece of it, a concave, concave. It looks like a satellite dish. And he's looking at that under a microscope. It's a chitin plate, chitin, C-H-I-T-I-N. He's looking at it under a microscope, looking at this extremely precise nanostructure array. Well, this is an electron microscope. But in this one, he's looking at these star shapes all on these concave plates. And he happened to take a pair of tweezers, and he had another one like this, and he dragged it across, and it jumped out of the tweezers and floated up in the air and fell off to the side. So he thought, I've been working too long. So he takes it out from under the microscope. He does it again, and it floats up out of the air and floats back down. So he goes out and kills a bunch of these bugs, rips off their wings, and he glues them all to this board, like a grid, 10 by 10, something like that. And he sets it where all the cups are facing up. He drops an ink pen on it, and the ink pen floats in the air. He drops a tack on it, the tack floats in the air. He turns the board upside down, and the board floats in the air. It's like, whoa. And it all sounds like BS, but remember, fluctuations, 0-point energy, and training, the whole bit. Okay, he said the detail broke loose from my tweezers. It hung suspended in the air, then it fell back. He ties these panels together, and he makes these panel blocks made out of chitin. Okay, so they're basically little repelling blocks. Okay, array levitation of pin, tack, and other objects. He says, I'm not naming the class to which this insect belongs. It seems on the verge of extinction. He's a big tree hugger. I have no problem with tree huggers, but you got to protect as much as you can, and he doesn't want to give the name of this because he thinks if this gets out to the world, they'll come in and take every bug they can. I wrote him a letter and I said, look, we don't care about the name of the bug. Just send us a couple of samples. If we can duplicate the effect, prove it's not electrostatic, it's not electromagnetic, we can make artificial, just analyze it with an acoustic microscope, a scanning microscope, get the specific dimension. Is it hexagonal, tetragon, what? And make it into an array. What is the structure, the size? Is it on angstroms, micrometers, what? And just run off sheets of this stuff. So if you made a pair of coveralls with this stuff, you'd float in the air like a big balloon. So, it gets better. So,
Correlated Magnetics Research presents Programmable Magnets. Correlated magnetic structures are programmed by imparting onto the substrate coded patterns of magnetic field sources that determine their field and force properties. Programmed correlated magnetic structures respond to each other based on the attract, repel, or cancellation forces coded into their surfaces and the spatial proximity of the structures themselves. Correlated Magnetics Research has produced and demonstrated the first non-contact attachment device utilizing a pair of permanent magnets. With multi-level correlated magnets, we have programmed individual magnets to exhibit both attract and repel forces simultaneously. Since codes can be devised to control both field strength and engagement distance, we can create regions on the magnet surface that exhibit a long throw attract force and other regions that exhibit a short throw repel force. This device was created to illustrate this principle. Here we see the multi-level correlated magnets mounted in a hinged fixture, much like a cabinet door. When the correlated pair approach each other, the attract force engages and pulls the magnets together. Before they make contact, however, a stiff repel force is encountered and the magnets move away. The opposing forces are damped out in short order and an equilibrium position is achieved. The magnets are trapped between balanced forces of attract and repel. So how do we accomplish this? Here is a typical force versus distance comparison where the attractive force for a magnet pair is measured and recorded as the magnets separate. Codes can be devised to control field strength and engagement distance, as well as the behavior like the non-contact attachment you just saw. As the code density increases, the peak attractive force increases, and the engagement distance is reduced. By exploiting the shape of the engagement curves, and by programming one behavior to attract while its counterpart repels, we can prescribe the distance at which equilibrium is reached, and the strength of the forces on each side of the transition point. Through correlated magnetics, we can balance the opposing forces to trap coated magnets at equilibrium position, effectively attaching component structures without contact. Doors, cabinets, gates, and other enclosures can lock without damage or contact wear. Automated mechanisms can grapple items without touching them. Passive stability and vibration damping for optical tables and other devices are enabled. Even non-contact docking of modular space vehicles is on the horizon.
It's a man named Grebennikov from Russia. Grebennikov was kind of a non-conventional scientist. He was an entomologist, did a lot of work with bugs, entomology. And his favorite thing was to go out into the steppes of Russia and into the various outer hinterlands and camp out in the summers and study his favorite subject. And on one of these expeditions, he started seeing some weird effects. This is all explained in great detail on the Achillenet site if you type in Grebennikov and his flying box or gravity platform. But anyhow, the result of this was to show that he found a certain bug that didn't fly, it levitated. And this was, he'd put this bug into a little vial or something, and he saw this vial jumping up off the lab table, jumping up and down. And of course this is patently impossible based on any type of normal physics. So he got into this, and he found out that the bug wings themselves we're creating an anti-gravity phenomena under certain conditions. And of course what we have here, if you analyze, I think I found the bug, actually a beetle. And if you analyze this bug structure, you see a hexagonal pyramid structure array throughout the entire bottom wing of this bug. Turns out that beetles have two wings. The top wing is called a wing cover, and what the beetle does is it lifts this wing cover up and then it flips out its lower wings or inner wings. Now the bug cover protects the inner wings, but when it gets excited or something, it flips these other wings out and it flaps these other wings, and the inner wings flap a little, and this beetle goes gyrating around. They can't fly very good, but they sure levitate great, I guess. And anyway, he took a whole bunch of these bug wings and he glued them to like a Venetia blind structure, and he put it into a little platform he built. So they were all these bug wings were all covered in here. And he used I theorize he used the wing covers as well as the inner wing itself. There's also a kind of a handlebar on this thing with some controls. You can see the thing a little better here in detail. The controls, I think, had to be manipulated continuously and probably vibrated to create the same action that the bug was doing. There was also down at the base some kind of a lever, which I suspect controlled the amount of lift he was getting out of this thing. Anyway, Grebennikov claimed that he could fly this thing, or levitate it, and it would go around at almost 1,000 miles an hour. Now you ask, how can that happen? You know, well, he said that there was an energy field that built up around this thing due to this gravity field building up in the platform, and by this thing building up, it built out a force field that basically surrounded him and protected him from the local environment. So even though he was flying at 1,000 miles an hour, you could go, you know, you could be wearing your Sunday best suit and not get it flutter a bit at 1,000 miles an hour. I'm not sure I'd want to stand on something going 1,000 miles an hour that's 2 feet square. But this picture here shows him sitting on the ground. And these pictures are much better if you get on the KeelyNet site. This is the platform with him on it about 3 to 6 feet above the ground, because here's the shadow here down below. Now you could say this is all faked, but if you get into the other things he did with shape, they almost mirror the stuff that I discovered, and it proves, I guess, that there's either two crazy people in the world, or there's two people that have found the same discoveries. So I think that this is a valid phenomena, and I'll show you why. Next slide is a micrograph that I took of a beetle inner wing. This is at 100x. If you look closely at this thing, you can see rows of bumps all along the bottom of this wing. Each row is staggered from the next row next to it. And this is all over the surface of the bottom of the wing. Now, I don't know of any aerodynamic surface that has bumps all over the bottom to help it fly better. If you blow this up to 430x, you can start to see some of this microstructure of the cells that form where these bumps are. The next slide, at 970x, you start to see what these bumps that stick up are. They're hairs, look like hairs or fibers that grow out of the center of these hexagonal cells. And of course, this harkens back to my basic shape power discovery, is that each one of these, because of their shape going down to a point, is creating a magnetic field. And remember, a magnetic field is a rotating piece of vortex in the ether.
built this mysterious monument, Stonehenge. Nobody knows how they did it, how they moved and stood these massive stones. It's a scientific mystery. This man swears he's cracked. He's building his own Stonehenge in his Flint, Michigan backyard to prove it. Wally Wallington's not a scientist, but he knows a thing or two about moving rocks.
That's a 300-pound block. This is a 1,600-pound block. Not too difficult.
He's a retired construction worker whose passion is moving heavy items. His feats always draw a crowd, mostly family.
I thought he was crazy. Who cares about moving blocks around? But then when you look at the magnitude of the weights that he's moving around, it is really impressive, and he's not using any equipment or anything.
In playing with blocks, Wally thinks he's discovered how Stonehenge was moved.
This is my first Stonehenge arch I permanently put in place. It's 3 blocks, they weigh over a ton each.
It's all based on a very simple technique.
I found a simple explanation for this, to move a block about the weight of a minivan, would be to place a stone underneath it. And once I balance on it, I can spin it. Of course, with that spin, you've seen I didn't go anywhere. But I got 2 handles on my lever, and I could place another stone on this side. Now, every time I spin a half rotation on each stone, I move the block horizontally, the distance between the stones. With my own output, I could move a 1-ton block 300 feet per hour.
Using this technique, he's moved everything from 1-ton blocks to buildings.
He moved up to a pole barn at one point, a 30 by 40 pole barn that he moved 300 feet for me, and it was more or less, you know, what else can we move? And he looked at me and says, hey, can we move your barn? And I said, sure, let's, you know. Next thing you know, it was 300 feet in the other direction onto another piece of property.
It can move barns, and Wally's betting it moves Stonehenge's 25-ton rocks. But raising these giants is a whole different puzzle.
This is 19,200 pounds. Yeah, it's 128 square feet of, cubic feet of concrete.
Today, Wally hopes to solve it. He'll put one of his theories to the test and try to stand this 19,200-pound block by himself.
I've tried to do this without any mechanical machinery at all. I've used mostly sticks and stones for my equipment. No pulleys, no hoists, no metal levers. Just try to use gravity too, I believe, is my favorite tool. Whoop.
The first goal is getting this block 3 feet off the ground.
In order to move it up to this point, I just rock the block back and forth, adding weight to that end, and that opens a gap on this side, and just slide a board in. Then I add the weight to that end, there it goes, and slide a board in on this end.
This shoring box acts like a jack, slowly raising the block. It's 3 feet off the ground, but tomorrow is the big experiment, standing it up. The grandkids have taken the day off school, and the cameras are rolling.
Hey, you guys watch Papa, he's going to do something wild.
They're here to watch Grandad lift a block the weight of 2 bulldozers.
It's ready.
Here's how it's supposed to work.
The first thing I'm going to do here is release this temporary shoring I have set, and come over here, release some of my counterweights, and that's going to put the entire weight of the block on this rope. So then I'm going to release the rope, come back in, and the rope's going to be my brake. I'm going to guide it into the pit. The easiest way I can explain this is this is just a big teeter-totter, and I got the big kid on that end, and he's going to go down, this end's going up.
He believes in his technique, but he's had some setbacks in the past.
One day I got thrown over top of a block, and a couple times I had the blocks roll off the top and almost land on my feet. One time I knocked myself out cold on the concrete, and so it's been challenging. Okay. Are you ready? Yes! All right. Now just start spraying the sand. The sand will wash out and the block will start coming down.
Once the sand is washed from the pit, the block's own weight slowly stands it up.
Okay, finally, she's between the lines, guys. Looks good.
He did it.